Good afternoon. I'm Belinda McAtee, Executive Director of the Beverly Hills Bar Association. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to Lawyers in a Time of COVID. Are we performing competently? Before we begin, I have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First, you will receive your MCLE certificate shortly after the program via email. Your certificate will also be stored in BHBA Plus, which is our members only online community. I really encourage you to check that out. For those of you who are in your compliance period, I know I'm up as of the 1st of February. I was able to complete my card for the state bar in about 45 seconds, thanks to having everything stored in one place. Please take a moment to also complete the survey that we include with your certificate via email. And now on to the program. There are much more detailed bios of our great speakers available online, and I know you're here to hear them talk and not me, so I'll keep my introduction short. Both of our speakers today represent employers in labor and employment matters at Ogletree Deakins. Nicole McAtee, Nicole McAtee is a shareholder at the firm. She received her JD from the UCLA School of Law, where she was the chief editor of the UCLA Women's Law Journal. Danielle Goodman is of counsel at the firm. She received her JD from Loyola Law School, where she was an active member of the moot court team and international and comparative law review. They both have established expertise on these issues from the employer side, and we are really looking forward to them sharing that insight with us. So I'm going to turn things over now to the two of them to address how attorneys' mental, emotional, and physical abilities impact the work that we do during these very challenging times.
Thank you. Nicole, you want to get us started?
So first one we've got today is, what is competence? And California Rule 1.1 states a lawyer may not intentionally, recklessly, with gross negligence, or repeatedly fail to perform legal services with competence. So this category used to previously be known as substance abuse. It's now called competence, and we are required to have 1 hour of training on that. So we're here to talk to you guys about all the lovely things that have changed on the mental health side for since COVID-19. On to the next slide.
I'll do this one. So this is there was a John Hopkins study recently done about attorneys and comparing attorneys specifically with the general population. And this study is great because it really informs us as to why this presentation is important, and not just for your MCLE credit, which is very important, but also for your lives. So the study showed that attorneys are 3 times more likely to suffer from depression than the general public. Suicide is a 3rd leading cause of death for attorneys after cancer and heart disease. And suicide rate is 6 times the rate of the general population. So there is an issue where attorneys are facing a high amount of stress, higher instances of depression, substance abuse, and it's a really important topic and something we need to address. Next slide. Okay, a few more statistics. Attorneys are about twice as likely to be chemically dependent as the general population. So 1 in every 6 attorneys instead of 1 in every 13 people in the general population. We abuse drugs at a higher rate. Alcoholism is a factor in 30% of attorneys completed suicides, and 50% of disciplinary cases involve chemical dependency. So we are getting into trouble with depression, with substance abuse, and it's causing us to get into trouble with the state bar. Next slide.
Well, those statistics are not great. Research isn't any better on it as well. COVID's impact on mental health has only made these issues more significant, and the data on this slide is part of ALM's 2021 Mental Health and Substance Abuse Survey. They asked 3,200 law firm attorneys and staff about COVID-19's impact on their well-being and how their firms responded. Not surprisingly, the research shows a significant impact on mental health during the pandemic. The study showed that a greater proportion of those interviewed reported instances of mental health troubles across the board compared to their last survey conducted in 2019. Why might that be? Well, lawyers are feeling more isolated, more burned out, depressed than ever, even as law firms have tried to tackle these issues by rolling out new programs and have made efforts to over-communicate throughout the last year. As I'm sure many of you have felt, a Zoom meeting or Zoom call is just not the same as having lunch with your coworkers, and those kinds of issues compound on mental health problems. 74% of those that were interviewed said their work environment negatively impacted their health. And as lawyers are feeling these impacts on their mental health, they've also turned to alcohol and substance abuse, which is a significant problem. Why do we think all of this is happening? Let's look at some of the beliefs about our work environment and how they might be impacting some of these statistics. Next slide, please. So let's go to what's a vacation. So as lawyers, we don't take vacations very often. And even if we do, they're working vacations. We're still checking our emails. We're still responding to last minute projects. The ALM study, only 36% of the 3,200 people that were interviewed said they used all of their vacation. And frankly, that's even surprising to me because they were probably still responding to emails. The survey also, most of the people, 62% of them said they knew a colleague who was depressed, 50% know a colleague with an alcohol problem. So what does the survey say for us? In a year like any other, unlike any other, employees worked harder and took less time off. In 2020, the average workday lengthened by nearly an hour, according to a working paper published by the National Bureau of Economic Research. So despite longer hours for everyone, workers are taking less breaks and they're taking less time off. Since March, an overwhelming majority of Americans have shortened, postponed, or canceled their planned time off, according to a study. So in a time when employees need vacation and breaks the most, to handle the additional stressors of the pandemic, it seems like all workers aren't really taking that time, much needed time off. And not surprisingly, again, attorneys are some of the worst culprits. We also were seeing a lot of companies have surpluses of personal time off, and they're trying to figure out how they should deal with that. Time off is not being utilized by employees. So some companies are responding by encouraging employees to take time off or mandating that they take paid time off to curb burnout, improve morale. However, less than half of employers have considered changing their PTO policies or practices in light of COVID-19, given the research related to employees' habits. Can go to the next slide, please.
And what Nicole was saying about us not taking time off, it's important, but it also has to do with our mental health. So not only do we not take vacations, but we don't take time off to address our mental health issues. And Nicole and I are part of a large firm. We, have clients that are demanding, and I'm sure a lot of you all have that. And there is a overwhelming sense in the legal community that you can't take time off for vacation or your mental health because it is not going to, it's not going to help your career. So 65% of attorneys feel that they couldn't take an extended leave because to tend to their mental health issues. People thought that it would hurt their career. 77% were fearful of what the firm would think, and 56% felt like they had too much work to go on leave, which is just absurd because it's when you have so much work that you feel so stressed out and you need to go on leave. So not going on leave just makes the matter even worse. I see a few people in the chat asking to share a link to the slides, and okay. Just wanted to let you all know that there's a link in the email so you can see there's a PDF or a link to a PDF in the email that you all received for the session. So just in case. Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure everyone had it. All right, next slide. Okay, how has COVID impacted our mental health? Okay, well, I think a lot of these things that are listed on the screen are pretty self-explanatory and things that you already know, maybe even on an intuitive level, but it's worth noting that they are really, there's substantial impacts on our health. The most obvious is fear and anxiety about COVID and death. I mean, I don't know about you all, but I had a cold recently, and I think I must have taken 7 COVID tests. It wasn't COVID, but you know, people just assume that, and then you go to these fears of, oh my gosh, should I give other people COVID? Did I give my son COVID? Did I give my grandfather COVID? And it's just a lot to think about that you never thought about before. Another thing is isolation and a lack of connection. We don't go into the offices, into our offices. We don't see people socially as much. And there's research that suggests that loneliness has a comparable effect on health as smoking a cigarette. So it is not good for our health as social beings to be alone, and COVID has made that even more pronounced. And then the third one, which is near and dear to my heart, is increase in childcare responsibilities. I don't know how many moms and dads there are out there, but I'm a mom of a 3-year-old kiddo and a second one on the way. And holy hell, COVID has been so hard on childcare responsibilities, especially for women. Not that men don't do their fair share, but statistically, there has been a much higher percentage of women either doing more childcare or reducing hours or leaving the workplace altogether. In a recent study with the University of Southern California's Center for Economic and Social Research, 44% of women reported being the only household member providing care, compared to 14% of men. And it is a even more drastic difference between men and women when you account for college education. So among college educated mothers, 64% said that they were reducing their work hours to take care of their families. So it is a huge stressor for attorneys, and particularly for female attorneys. It's always been the case that women kind of tend to do more childcare responsibilities, but it's even worse now with COVID. And then finally, there's a greater demand for services coupled with a need for more immediate responses for clients. So Nicole and I have seen this in our practice, where our clients' employers need help with navigating COVID regulations and helping the employees go remote, and then helping employees return, vaccine mandates or no mandates, and the constant shifting of the ETS from OSHA, issues with people being sick and needing to take leave, kin care. I mean, it has completely rocked our collective worlds as employers. So it has brought a greater demand for our time at the same time that we're being stretched thinner as attorneys. Next slide.
That's absolutely true. You know, if there's a COVID outbreak at one of the companies that we represent, they expect us to be on the line immediately to give them guidance on, you know, reporting to the Department of Public Health, or, you know, addressing each individual COVID leave for those employees. You don't really have a lot of time to wait or say, hey, I'll get back to you in 24 hours. It's always, all the time, immediate. So, and to make those matters worse, we also are seeing persistent staffing issues amongst law firms. Anybody that is working in a law firm has seen the associate turnover, even partner turnover. A lot of people are calling this the Great Resignation. I think 4.4 million people actually quit their jobs in September of last year. And that trend is continuing. I think we saw even more in November of last year. So we are seeing a massive demand for our services as attorneys. with immediate responses needed, but we don't have enough attorneys to fill that void right now. So everyone is struggling and stressed out trying to keep up with that increased need. So I read in an article, and I thought this was a great quote that I wanted to share with you guys. They called this time, we're on the brink of a disruption as great as last year's sudden shift to remote work. The move to hybrid work, a blended model where some employees return to workplace and others continue to work from home, law firms seem to be impacted quite a bit. Mass resignations by associates and even partners has created a complete and utter disruption of the workforce and what attorneys demand as reasonable working conditions. So due to understaffing issues, as most of you may have seen already, law firms are having to adapt quickly, reconsidering billable hours, reconsidering benefits, bonuses, signing on bonuses, etc. All of that stuff, including the financial impact that has occurred for some people, which, some people did receive pay cuts when COVID-19 happened, and a lot of people were worried about losing their job. Compound with the lack of boundaries. Most of you guys can probably speak to working from home has many benefits, but it also has a lot of challenges. We have no division between work and home life anymore. We are always available. We always have our laptop present, and those lack of boundaries creates additional stress. So all of these things are compounding attorneys' stress and their staff, which means that it's impacting our mental health, and not in a great way. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So we apologize, this is hard to read. It is an excerpt from the ALM study. Essentially, it shows multiple questions that were asked of attorneys, and almost all of them, attorneys reported having a harder time from a mental health perspective today than they did a year ago or a year before that. So people are more depressed, more stressed, more anxious, etc. We can go on to the next slide.
So in addition to stress and anxiety, we also have substance abuse, which has a relationship with stress and anxiety and depression. So substance abuse on its own is considered a disease. There is new research happening every day about substance abuse, whether that is alcohol, prescription medication, or other drugs. Substance abuse qualifies as a disability under FEHA, which is the California equivalent to Title VII. It also is a disability under the American with Disabilities Act. Substance abuse contains a lot of characteristics that some people are familiar with, some people aren't. One of them is that it alters your brain chemistry. So the chemicals in your brain literally do something different than if your brain were not addicted to substances. You have cravings for these altering substances. You lose control because of these cravings, and substance abuse occurs in the part of the brain that is not where you make your rational decisions. Next. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. Okay. Substance abuse is a problem among attorneys, something we've talked about. 2016 study of over 12,000 attorneys shows that between 21 and 36% of licensed employed attorneys qualify as problem drinkers. This is something I'm sure we've all anecdotally seen through our time being attorneys, going to events, people maybe having a few too many, and maybe we don't attribute that to being attorneys, but the statistics tell us that there is a problem among attorneys with having a particular dependency on alcohol. Of course, it's not surprising. We're so stressed out that we turn to substances that help us forget, and alcohol is one of those. Men have a higher rate of anxiety, depression, stress, and alcoholism than women. And attorneys in private firms have the highest rates of problem drinking and depression. probably because of the stress associated with, being in a private firm and billable hours and all the rest of it. So yeah, next slide.
All right, lawyers, addiction, and COVID. So I think you guys are probably seeing a theme here, but alcohol and drug use substantially increased last year. COVID has been hard on us, and attorneys are turning to drugs and alcohol to try and numb that pain. A study revealed that a third of respondents reported an increase in their alcohol and drug use last year. And you have seen anecdotal and other evidence of America's increase on these substances and alcohol. I think I saw this morning, CNN reported that the world bought more champagne than ever before last year, attuned to $6.2 billion on champagne. So everyone is turning to alcohol and drugs in a time of crisis, and attorneys are doing it more acutely than other professions. So ironically, what is the link between being an attorney and addiction? Some of the same factors that make us good lawyers and can make us want to be lawyers actually drive us to addiction. So behaviorists believe that people who are driven to be lawyers are sometimes motivated by a desire for justice for themselves and others. And a lot of times, the link between wanting to do good, justice for yourself and others, is because it came from a variety of factors, including abuse, neglect, or trauma. All of those are factors that lead to addiction as well. So there is this strong link there. Research also suggests that there's a link between attorneys' perfectionism and addiction. So as you can probably imagine, extreme perfectionism feeds self-doubt and self-criticism, which in turn increases the likelihood of addiction as attorneys fail to meet the impossible standards they've set for themselves and look to alcohol and other substances to make them feel better about their perceived inadequacies. In addition, attorneys are taught to aim for perfection. That's drilled into you during law school and by our clients, by our firms, etc. So all of these issues are compounding what is already a link towards addiction or being prone towards addiction. Attorneys are also trained to be aggressive and to be emotionally detached. They are famous for challenging anything that they are told, including whether they should stop drinking or whether they have a problem with alcohol or other substance use. So all of these traits seem to contribute to our high rate of addiction amongst attorneys. Next slide, please. So why do lawyers why did lawyers deny the problem? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, but, attorneys require greater level of proof. We come at problems from an analytical perspective. So it's going to take a lot of effort to convince an attorney that they have a problem, especially when they're able to get up every single day and do their job. Well, I showed up for court today, must not have a drinking problem because I won my motion. So it's really difficult to identify these issues amongst attorneys and to convince someone that they have a problem. Lawyers also expect to be looked to for answers, so they're more unwilling to admit that they have some sort of issue that could impact their decision-making skills. Elite lawyers and all lawyers might have big egos that impact their ability to admit when they have a problem or not. And lawyers are trained to keep secrets, and there's a fear of admitting addiction, so they try to handle them on their own. Overall, the statistics are clear, though. Lawyers have significantly higher levels of problem drinking, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, etc., when compared with the general population. So why do attorneys still deny the problem when we all know it's there? Next slide, please.
And there's signs of substance abuse that we can look for both in ourselves and in others. So one or a few actually telltale signs are physical, things like bloodshot eyes and slurred speech. And these are things that you all are kind of familiar with as conventional ways to figure out if someone does have substance abuse, including yourself. Are there changes in appetite or weight or appearance? Does someone seem to have lost the color in their face? Are they shaky? Do they seem really tired? Is there some sort of secretive or an unusual behavior where people are, hiding what they're doing or not doing, including the amount of substances consumed? Often substance abuse causes a drop in attendance because people don't want to face other people. They're worried that they smell. They're worried that they won't be able to perform competently. And oftentimes substance abuse is coupled with a neglect of responsibility. Has there been a decrease in performance? Has there been lapse in memory or thought process? And finally, what kind of mood changes are there? Do people swing in their mood changes? Do you swing in your mood changes? Do you go from feeling depressed and to very happy? Why are all these things happening together? It's something to evaluate both in yourself and in other people. Next slide. Okay, signs of depression. So we talked about alcohol and substances more generally, but there's also depression. That's something that attorneys deal with in a higher number. So depression is different than the blues. The blues are just, maybe being upset for a few days, maybe a week, something happens and you're just kind of not happy. Depression is something that lasts for longer than 2 weeks, and it's a sustained change in your normal mood. A lot of people who suffer from depression will feel that they have no energy. They don't want to get up in the morning. They don't want to do the things that they usually like to do. They don't want to eat. They're just not hungry. Maybe they feel nauseous. They're just not interested in doing the things that they typically would do, and eating is one of those. They are sometimes not able to sleep because they are just so anxious during the night. And then there's a lot of really negative thoughts, self-critical thoughts, feeling hopeless, and feeling like there's like no point to live. And of course, like one of the most severe signs is recurring thoughts of death or suicide. Next slide.
So on our next slide, we have some more fun statistics about COVID's impact on our ability to be lawyers. A 2021 study shows that the pandemic has impacted our ability to even make basic decisions. So the study was called Stress in America 2021. And they found that 1 in 3 Americans said sometimes they are so stressed about the coronavirus pandemic that they struggle to even make basic decisions. Millennials reported 48% more likely to struggle with this, even when compared with their counterparts. The chief executive officer explained that the pandemic has imposed a regimen of constant risk assessment upon many. Each day brings an onslaught of choices with an ever-changing context as routines are upended, and once trivial daily tasks are recast in the light of pandemic life. So in this sustaining a heightened degree of vigilance inevitably wears on our mental health and our ability to make basic decisions. Next slide, please. So what is the difference between stress and burnout? Stress is short-term with an end in sight and has positive short-term side effects, think fight or flight. Burnout is stress built out over time that creates a cycle of negative emotions and withdrawal. Burnout might be the thing that we're all kind of feeling right now, something after surviving a pandemic for 2 years that we thought was only maybe going to last for a couple of months. So Many of us started the pandemic telling ourselves that we just need to get through the next few weeks, the next few months, and it will get better. Well, now we are 2 years in. Many of us are accepting that in some ways things will never turn back to pre-pandemic life, and we're having to adjust. Well, don't worry, the doom and gloom part of this presentation is almost over. We will go over some warning signs, and we'll also discuss lots of helpful tips to combat all of the stressors and additional negative impacts on your health. Next slide, please. So as we went over with depression and alcohol and substance abuse, we also have some warning signs for anxiety, dizziness, faintness, dry mouth, fatigue, hyperactivity or hyperactivity, hyperventilation, knotted stomach. We also have additional signs. If we could go to the next slide, please. Loss or increase in appetite, nausea, vomiting, shaky hands, tremors, shortness of breath, sweating, tingling in extremities. All right, if we could go to the next slide. This is our helpful little diagram that explains what is happening to your brain under stress. So your brain perceives a threat, then your nervous system kicks in, right? And parts of your brain release a protein called CRF, which stimulates the pituitary gland into releasing hormones. This in turn triggers your glands to release stress hormones, which are in charge of diverting and redistributing energy in our bodies when we're experiencing threat. So what's an interesting fact, though, is that blood clotting factors increase. And because we're protecting our body against injury, that's what we think is going to happen. Blood moves away from the surface of the skin when we perceive a threat. Our body is actually having a very physical response to stress, even though the stress that we're experiencing is not necessarily a threat of actual danger, but it's because our bodies are hardwired based on our own biology from many, many moons ago to respond in that way. If we go to the next slide, please.
Okay, and I'm going to take over. Nicole, we've had a little bit of feedback that your audio is distorted. Maybe try calling in from your phone and seeing if that works. I can take over for a bit to see if we can address it. And if not, then we apologize and try your best to listen. A lot of this material is in the slides. And if there was something you didn't hear and you really want to hear, please put it in the chat and we'll address it. Okay, so psychological effects of chronic stress. There is a really interesting book, and I can try to find the author, but it's called Your Instincts Are Killing You. And it's a book I read about how your instincts that Nicole mentioned, your chemical instincts that were ingrained in us when we were, in the jungles and fields, running away from animals, how those instincts have remained, but danger is changed substantially. So now we have a brain that adjusts to danger, but what danger is has changed. Our brain is not good at telling the difference between fear of a tiger and fear of a deadline. So our brain becomes hardwired to react with the same stress that we would feel if we were being chased by a tiger, for example. So our body will, the chemicals change. We have an increase in blood flow and oxygen to the muscles, which would obviously help us if we're running away from a dangerous animal, but don't help us when we are nervous about giving a presentation, for example. Chronic stress can increase hypertension and heart disease, digestive disorders, headaches, and vulnerability to infection. When you're extremely stressed out, your immune system is weakened and you can get sick, which obviously does not help with stress. Anger causes a huge increase in blood pressure, and I'm sure that you all have experienced this just anecdotally on your own, like you get off of a really contentious call with opposing counsel and your blood pressure is really high and you're feeling really aggressive. You're not calm the way you perhaps were before the call. And anxiety damages your arteries, it kills your brain cells, it increases risk for osteoporosis, and like I said earlier, it suppresses your immune system. So, and as studies go on, we're learning more and more that stress is causing a greater amount of physical damage than we could have imagined. Your survival instinct is killing you. Someone from the chat got the book. Yeah, it's a great book. I listened to it on audiobook, and it reinforces a lot of these ideas that I just mentioned. Nicole, are you back online? You want to see if it works? Okay, can we get to the next slide?
I changed out the microphone. Is this
Okay.
better, folks?
Hopefully
I can't hear
better.
Yeah, I can't hear any feedback or on my end, but.
Okay, all right, so we're at the next slide.
Okay, well, I'll start talking. If you guys can't hear me, let me know in the chat box and Danielle will take over. So lawyering while sleep. Oh, we've got better audio. Thank you guys. Sorry about that. We switched out the microphone. Of course, it didn't have any issues during the prep session, but it has issues during the presentation. Okay, so lawyering while sleep deprived. A study published last month suggests it might help to shift our focus to quality rather than quantity of sleep. So that's actually very new research regarding sleep deprivation. Everyone always talks about getting 8 hours. Well, apparently getting 8 hours, if it's not good quality sleep, doesn't really matter. So really focus on getting that good quality sleep. That helps. And that's because when we are sleep deprived, we might as well be drunk. So if you are up for 17 to 19 hours, your decision-making skills, your motor skills, et cetera, it's essentially like your brain has a BAC level of 0.05. As most of you probably know, in a lot of states, 0.08 is what would get you a DUI. So it's really important that we are not running on zero sleep, because it's not going to produce the best work product for our clients. And it's very difficult for us to fulfill our obligations to engage in services in a competent way when we essentially have a BAC of a drunk person. So another thing is that another study conducted recently said that 40% of people have had worse sleep since the pandemic. And this is also evidenced by the fact that there's been a significant increase in people using sleep medication. So there's been a huge uptick in the use of melatonin and other over-the-counter sleep aids. So if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Okay, and this is important for us because we need to make sure that we have well-functioning minds. So, if we are close to being drunk because we are sleep deprived, then we as lawyers definitely cannot make good decisions, create good strategies, execute those strategies well, and cope with obstacles that are being put in our place. So in order to function well, we need to sleep, we need to take care of our bodies, we need to take care of our minds, and not only for our own mental health, but also for our competency, the theme for today. We cannot be executing good plans when we are incapacitated because we're under the influence of drugs or anxiety or depression, or we are sleep deprived. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, addictive pattern or wise response. So here we're pivoting to the solutions. We've Nicole and I have spent the last 40 minutes telling you all of the problems, but we are here to also help. One of the things that is becoming more and more taught and researched is mindfulness. It is something that both Nicole and I have started incorporating into our practice and our daily lives. And I will not speak for Nicole, but I think that it has helped me tremendously. I don't have a substance abuse issue, but I have an anxiety issue. It's really hard being a lawyer right now. Mindfulness has been just so helpful. So we try to use, we're gonna talk a little bit more about this, but I try to use mindfulness to interrupt our patterns of anxious thoughts, ruminating thoughts, thoughts that make you go towards the negative and could contribute to stress. Mindfulness is a great way to regulate the way that you think. I oftentimes, after I have a contentious exchange with another attorney, will just kind of sit and think about it and say, okay, that was really contentious. I am now feeling really anxious. I'm going to sit and not respond because doing so is not going to help. So you just kind of think about your what's happening in the moment and acknowledge it without necessarily getting wrapped up in it. So this next part of the presentation is about what we can do to develop a relationship with our pain and difficulties instead of trying to avoid them with alcohol or substances. Next slide. Okay, so like I said, there's good news. We can change our patterns, we can change what we do, and we can change the way that we respond to situations. We can create new neural pathways that help us literally train our bodies to think differently. This can create a sense of balance that comes from our wisdom and leads to a greater sense of fulfillment. Next slide.
As Daniel has touched on, there are a couple of things that we can do as attorneys to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. Meditation is great. We wish we had Leslie Wallace with us here today, but she has actually spearheaded a meditation group at Ogletree. She does a quick Zoom call where everyone hops on for 30 minutes. She provides meditation for the entire firm, actually, which is pretty impressive because Ogletree is a worldwide firm. She does it, and she provides all of this lovely guidance that we're giving you guys today, and we're going to go over. So the second thing is self-compassion. As attorneys, and we've touched on this, we're really hard on ourselves, and we should give ourselves a little bit of break, and being able to be kinder to ourselves helps combat all of these issues. And then the third is basic self-care. So a lot of the tips and tricks that we're going to go over may seem pretty basic, but we're going to tell you guys anyways, because we all know that we don't follow them, like healthy exercise. All right, going on to the next slide. So this is our first slide, helping you help you. So we recommend meditate and pray. Consistent stress reduction occurs with only 10 minutes of daily meditation. So one of the things Leslie taught me, because when I first started meditating, I was like, I don't have 10 minutes. And she said, you don't have to start with 10 minutes. You don't have to start with an hour. Start with a minute. Sit in your office with your eyes closed and breathe deeply for a minute. And don't tell me you don't have a minute. And she also said that there are certain things you can do in a meditative way. So maybe you hate sitting still. Maybe you really just, the thought of sitting in your office with your eyes closed is terrible. Go on a mindful walk. Walk from your office to the water cooler and only think about that walk. Don't think about anything else. Focus on the feeling in your feet. Focus on where you're walking to. Focus on your breathing. And those kinds of mindful exercises don't feel as overwhelming to try and pull you out from your regular day. And it helps trick your mind into thinking, hey, I'm not too busy to do this. And it still has a substantial impact on your stress. Exercise, unplug from social media, eat a healthy diet, and cultivate a positive attitude. Since we brought up sleep earlier and how it could make you guys behave as if, and myself behave as if we're drunk, we're going to give you some tips on sleep. So according to studies, some of the best things you can do are create a routine, turn all the clocks away from view. This is one I didn't really think of, but how many times have you woke up in the middle of the night, looked at the clock and been like, oh my gosh, this is a specific time period. Turn all screens off and focus on your breathing. Try listening to soothing sounds like a baby white noise machine. Going on to the next slide.
Continued, we're helping you help you. Obviously, we've talked about this. Do not isolate, show self-compassion, and reevaluate what's reasonable during the pandemic. Reasonable turnaround times pre-pandemic, reevaluate them. Give yourself a little more time. Everything takes longer now. We have less staff. Things are more difficult. You can't expect yourself to perform at the same level that you did pre-pandemic every single time because we're dealing with more. Next slide, please. Okay, so combat burnout. Take the vacation, please. A Canadian study showed that vacations reduced depression and buffered against job stress substantially. Another study said that just taking a short vacation, 3-day leisure trip, reduced perceived levels of stress and reduced the levels of stress hormone in your body. So even just taking a long vacation, like 3 days, has a substantial impact. Moving on to the next slide, please. All right, so we've got our mini stress reducers. As Danielle mentioned, try some breathing exercises in your office. Take 3 deep breaths, imagine your muscles relaxing. Be mindful, focus on the immediate present, enjoy the moment. Stretch, walk around your office, do a little stretch there. Hopefully you have a door. Go outside, ask for help. If you're struggling, your colleague is probably struggling too. Check in with them, call them. You know, I know we don't see each other, but do a Zoom call. As shareholders and of counsel, we have an obligation to supervise our associates, and I have started doing a practice where I have an open Zoom call. I send out an invite to all of my associates and have almost like office hours so they can pop in, and it has the same sort of feel as being in the office. And 9 times out of 10, the associates bring up issues in their own lives that they probably wouldn't have sent me an email about. And I'm able to help direct them and guide them and provide them hopefully a little bit of a positive impact on their mental health. Turn off notifications, consider sleep mode on your phone. So you have a do not disturb during a certain set number of hours every single day. Get away from your computer, take healthy breaks from the screen, and don't take your computer with you on weekends or vacations. Not really sure that's feasible for attorneys, but let's try. Maybe one weekend, or maybe one vacation, or leave it in another room for just a few hours. So we're going to go to our next slide. Mindfulness as a tool. Danielle, I think.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I was so entrenched in I was so enraptured. Okay, so I'm going to go kind of quickly because there's an exercise that we want to do, or at least try to do. A mindfulness exercise. So mindfulness, observing your emotional mental experiences with deliberate, open, and curious attention. This is really important. I kind of touched on it earlier. It's a practice of mine when I get an email or something, you know, maybe a brief filed by another side that makes me irritated or I don't think is fair or right. I will often just read it, put it aside, and then think about how I'm feeling. I'm really angry. My heart's racing. I'm feeling like personally attacked by something, even though it's not at all personal. And I think it's really important to do that, to kind of just label those thoughts and observe what's happening. And then and for me, I tell myself that I'm not going to respond or engage until I have reduced my heart rate, my breathing is normal, and you know, I feel like I'm in a more calm state. So being in that mindful state, I feel more engaged both in myself and what is going on in the outside world. I don't feel like things are as personally directed to me. I don't feel as threatened. I don't feel like I'm in as much danger. So it's definitely a practice. It's not something that you do all the time, and it's something you have to kind of teach yourself. But it is beneficial, and it will help you try to balance doing things with just being and just kind of observing things. Okay, next slide. study on mindfulness impact on lawyers. It seems like we have a lot of people here who are kind of already in tune to mindfulness, and you may have heard of this book, The Anxious Lawyer by Jenna Cho. It's a wonderful book. I did it on audiobook because who needs to read when they don't have to? And it has the first studies that measure the impact of mindfulness and meditation on attorneys. The book came out, I think, 6 or so years ago. But it is just, it's really wonderful. It's a great resource. Next slide. And one thing that, Nicole and I've tried to do throughout this presentation is give you statistics, and there are lots of those in the anxious lawyer. Job effectiveness increased by 6%, depression decreased by about 30%, anxiety decreased by about 30%, same with stress. So taking the time just to acknowledge your feelings and be mindful of them and the impacts on your body and your emotions will help you in the long run, because it will help you be productive, so you can maybe one day take a vacation at some point in time. Go to the next slide, please. So why mindfulness? It decreases your stress levels, helps you become more resilient, and more importantly, it trains your brain just the same way that exercise would train your brain. It trains your brain in a cognitive way. It helps you kind of see more clearly, more objectively, and it'll eventually, at some point, help you focus and pay attention because you are not wrapped up in the stressors and the racing thoughts. Next slide. Okay, how does it work? For people who are not as familiar with mindfulness, it is an observation or practice of observing your body. So when you're sitting in a chair, you think about what it's like to have the chair fibers touch your skin, what that feels like, what your breathing feels like in that moment, maybe observing what you're thinking about. It's a practice of being present. Next slide.
Okay, now we have mindful self-compassion as a tool. So mindfulness and self-compassion go hand in hand. This practice, it helps you identify your feelings so you can gain emotional freedom. And emotional freedom, in part, is derived from having an acceptance of your emotions. So self-compassion is extending compassion, love, acceptance to oneself. As lawyers, we're not very great at it. We're overly critical. It goes back to that perfectionism. So self-compassion involves 3 aspects, including self-kindness, mindfulness, and common humanity. So one of the practices that you can do is labeling the emotion. Research shows that simply naming the emotion reduces a stress reaction to the body that can often occur with challenging emotions. If you name it, you can tame it. Next is finding emotions in the body. If you can feel it, you can heal it. So emotions have physical components that are universal, and finding emotions in the body is an essential factor in emotional regulation. The next is soften, soothe, and allow. Simply inquire, what do I need as you go about your day, and respond with self-compassion, not because you need any fixing or because something is wrong with you, but simply because you care about yourself, and that's okay. Okay, next slide, please. We can make space to choose. Between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So hopefully all of these tools will help you combat some of the effects of COVID-19 and how our mental health has changed over the last 2 years collectively as attorneys. If you go down to the next slide, please. We're going to do a quick exercise so you guys get maybe a little bit of mindfulness in your life.
We're running out of time, so we'll do like just an instruction. How's that?
There we go.
And you all now have the links to the materials, so you can review this. It's the second to last slide. You can also, I'm sure there's tons of videos on YouTube and resources, but Like I mentioned earlier, a good practice or a good way to start is just 1 minute, which is surprisingly long somehow when you're doing mindfulness. Sitting down in a chair, feet on the ground, hands, kind of in a neutral position, closing your eyes, and just focusing on your breath. Focusing on when you breathe in and what that feels like, and focusing on breathing out. Think about, are you warm? Are you cold? What does the air conditioning feel like on your skin? And just see where your thoughts go without judging them. Just kind of acknowledge, oh, I just thought about a flower. Not sure why, but just thought about the flower. And just kind of observe what is happening with your body in real time. And then the last slide, can we go to the next one? And this is the last one. A few of you have asked in the comments for the material so that you can send it to your law firms. Here's a great little resource for them. ABA recommendations on what law firms can do. It is a list of things that law firms can do. Leadership that is engaged is wonderful. Leadership that listens to its employees and empathetic with its employees, dare I say vulnerable, shares like their own flaws and vulnerabilities is really wonderful. And it's up to leadership to make decisions that will impact the people in the firm. Have clear expectations about work and clear expectations about when work does not have to happen. And use metrics to make sure that your policies and practices are working. A couple of things that are near and dear to my heart is taking a look at retention by giving people more flexibility, because we all work so hard and we're all on our phones all the time. Let's be honest, we don't have 9-to-5 jobs. So why don't we as law firm leaders try to take a more open approach to being flexible in terms of where people work and when they work? Provide support to your parents. Parents need it. They work so damn hard because they are trying to raise people and also work and people raising has now come together in one venue. Strengthen your wellness programs. Ogletree has a strong one led by Leslie Wallace, who's a member of the Beverly Hills Bar Association. And finally, provide technical support. Because when we're working remotely, we can be so effective, but we need to be able to access our documents. So just kind of basic stuff. I know we're out of time. I don't think that we saw any questions in the chat, but hopefully you guys have our information. If not, look us up on the LA bar, or excuse me, the California bar. Our emails are both there. We're not difficult to find if you have any connections or want to chat. All right. Thank you. I think that's all.
Thank you, everyone. It was great having this presentation today.